Welcome to Stoic Training. I'm glad you're here because today's conversation might just change the way you see yourself and how others see you. Here is the thing, truly intelligent men, they've got a secret. It's not about having all the answers or knowing the capital of every country. No, their real power is in knowing when to keep their mouth shut. Sometimes, what you don't say says more about you than any clever quote ever could. I've spent years studying people, both through the lens of ancient Stoic wisdom and by sipping too many coffees while watching human nature unfold in real time. And let me tell you, the wisest men I've known have something in common. They don't waste words. They don't rush to fill silence. And they never say things that chip away at their credibility. So today we're diving into 7 things intelligent men never say, not because they're flawless, but because they've learned, sometimes the hard way, that these phrases lead nowhere good. Stick around, hit that subscribe button, and let's get wiser together. 1. I already know that. There's a phrase that slips out more often than we'd like to admit. I already know that. It sounds harmless, even confident, but what it really reveals is something far less flattering, a closed mind. And an intelligent man knows better. He knows that the moment we convince ourselves there's nothing more to learn, we've slammed the door on growth. I learned this the hard way years ago. I was working with a mentor, a man who carried himself with the quiet certainty of someone who had lived through enough battles to speak sparingly. We were reviewing a process I had done 100 times before. He began explaining something about it, and without thinking, I cut him off with, "Yeah, I know that already." He gave me a look, calm but heavy, and moved on. Later that evening, I realized what I had done, not just interrupted him, but robbed myself of the chance to hear what he saw that I didn't. His years of experience had taught him things that didn't come printed in manuals or outlined in training videos, things I hadn't lived long enough to understand. When we say, "I already know that," what we're really saying is, "I have nothing left to learn." That's not intelligence. That's arrogance dressed in the costume of competence. And Stoic philosophy cuts right through that illusion. Marcus Aurelius warned us plainly, you cannot learn anything when you think you already know everything. What he meant was that the ego, our need to seem knowledgeable, to protect the image we've built, becomes the very thing that blocks our growth. It convinces us we're standing on solid ground when we're really balancing on pride. Intelligent men understand that knowledge is not a trophy you win and place on a shelf. It's a river, always moving, always changing. You step in the same place twice, and the water is different each time. I once watched a seasoned carpenter listen patiently to an apprentice explaining a technique he had likely mastered decades before. He nodded, asked questions, even thanked him for sharing. Later, I asked him why he didn't just tell the kid he knew all that already. He smiled and said, "Because sometimes you learn more by listening to the way someone else sees it. That's wisdom, and it's a kind of intelligence that doesn't need to broadcast itself." So, if you catch yourself thinking, "I've heard this before," take a breath. Listen anyway, not because you need to humor someone, but because you might catch something new, a detail, a shift in perspective, a nuance that deepens your understanding. And even if you don't, you practice humility, you show respect, and over time, that makes you someone worth listening to. In Stoicism, we call that mastery of the self, the ability to set aside pride in favor of clarity, the strength to be a student of life always. And in the end, that's the kind of intelligence that outlasts all the rest. 2. That's impossible. Several years ago, I worked alongside a man named Robert. He was sharp, experienced, the kind of leader who seemed to carry the weight of the entire company on his shoulders without ever showing strain. But there was one phrase he used often, almost like a reflex: that's impossible. Anytime a new idea surfaced, whether it was a proposal to enter a different market, streamline an outdated system, or even approach a difficult client, he dismissed it with those two words. At first it sounded practical, responsible even. After all, who has time to waste chasing pipe dreams? But over time, something became painfully clear. Every time he said, "That's impossible," it wasn't the situation he was describing. It was himself, his own limits, his own fear. The Stoics understood this kind of thinking well. Seneca wrote that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. And that's exactly what Robert was doing. He wasn't analyzing a situation objectively. He was projecting his own fear of failure onto it. Fear of the unknown, fear of being wrong, fear of trying and coming up short. It's a quiet fear, the kind that doesn't look like fear at all. It wears the mask of logic, caution, practicality, but under it is the very thing that keeps us small. The belief that if we can't see the entire path, we shouldn't take the first step. Stoic philosophy cuts through this self-imposed paralysis by reminding us that the obstacle isn't the problem. It's our perception of the obstacle that defeats us. I've seen this firsthand. There was a project I was once part of. Years after working with Robert, the budget was tight, the timeline shorter than seemed reasonable, and the team inexperienced. Every logical bone in my body told me it couldn't be done. But instead of saying, "That's impossible," I tried something different. I asked myself, what can I control today? What's the next small step I can take? That project turned out to be one of the most successful I've ever worked on. Not because we performed miracles, but because we refused to be paralyzed by the scope of the challenge. We stayed focused on the next step. Then the next. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events," and that became the difference. When a man